Hi guys, welcome back to Creative Melbourne Podcast. So today we've got me, Karen, hosting, and online with me we've got Arthur, Brad, and Keith.
Hi. G'day. Hello.
Hi.
And so tonight we're going to explore the definition of creativity. I guess a lot of people, when they think about creativity, they naturally associate creativity with being an artist and being a designer or a musician, like doing creative things. But because a lot of businesses now are embracing creativity and wanting creativity, a lot of people start to tend to feel like they don't have it. They tend to feel like, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, I don't know how to do all this kind of stuff. So my question for you guys tonight is, what is creativity to you, and what does creativity mean in a business setting?
I think and I've held this view as well, is that you needed to be artistic or be able to draw or play a musical instrument to be creative. But I think I'm starting to realize that creativity is just being able to, just blend different elements and things that you know already to approach a problem or a challenge, or to come up with something new, and you're taking what you know of already and combining it in different ways to get a different perspective on something. I think in a nutshell, that's, for me, that's one way of looking at being creative, or creativity.
Yes, well, I certainly reflect the point that you made. I grew up with both my mother and my sister as being excellent painters. And for some reason, I grew up with this feeling that, I couldn't do anything with a pencil or a paintbrush that made any sense at all. So I figured, therefore, I wasn't very creative. But at the same time, I was actually creating music. And it took me some years to realise that and other things that I've done over the years, photography, a whole range of things, is actually incredibly creative. And then in terms of applying it to business, there's one paper I read a while back that I found very, very powerful, and that was some work from Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School. And she was looking particularly at the fact that you actually, rather than creativity being something that's totally outside business, you actually need creativity. And she's found this from solid research. It's not only possible, but desirable in all forms of work. And I'm quoting from a paper here, no matter what people are doing. In particular, knowledge workers require creativity. She also looked at the definitional thing and highlighted there are actually two myths about how people define creativity. One is you have to be a genius, that if you're not a genius, you can't be creative. What she's found is that, yes, some people do have extreme talent, but basically everyone with normal human capacities, and I'm quoting again, is capable of producing creative work under the right circumstances. But not only that, it's not even a trade-off. Over and over again, in her work, she found that for the complex work organisations do today, there is no trade-off between creativity and productivity, efficiency, or work quality. It's not an optional extra. It's something you actually have to have in today's business environment.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is that I love what Ken Robinson describes it as, like, creativity is beaten out of us when we go to school. We're all born creative, exploring and playing and testing and trying different things, which, is another way of looking at creativity. And we go to school and we get told, no, you have to think this way, you have to regurgitate information and present it in this format. And slowly over the years, we develop this, this belief that we're not creative unless we are expressing it through art.
Yeah, I think this is the interesting thing about creative. If you look at the word creative, it just means to create, right? People get creativity and innovation mixed up, but if you look at the literature around that, creativity is the generation of the novel idea or the new thing, which could be an option, it could be a solution, it could have absolutely nothing to do with arts. It could be a creative business solution. But innovation is then the implementation of that idea and putting it into some sort of product or service. So to me, it's creation is often a thinking process, and even better, a social thinking process. Can you be creative alone? Yes. Is it faster and better if there's a range of people involved? I think absolutely yes, because ideas bounce off each other and create a chain reaction. And if you're the only source of the idea, then the number of possibilities are limited. A lot of the creativity is not just the creation of the idea, but then the hybridization, the ideas bouncing off each other, which creates hybrid possibilities. To me, that socialization is a very important part of creativity, and it accelerates idea generation, and also leverages much more diverse perspectives. And I think you end up with better products by being creative in your business processes.
And that's a very important distinction there, Arthur, around creativity and innovation, because I think, and you are right, people do tend to confuse the two. And they often think that you can have one without the other. And creativity kind of fuels the innovation, right? So it's good that we're starting to have those two as capabilities in the same conversation and understanding that they are very much related.
Yeah, like any idea or concept, there's a huge amount of variability in the literature about, what's what, definitions of knowledge, definitions of innovation or creativity. And, like they say, for every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD, right? But maybe that's a creative quote. But the idea of maximizing creativity by getting a diversity of people in the room bouncing the ideas. I've had all sorts of insights that have come to my mind that would never have come to me alone if it wasn't in a conversation like we're having now. And I think, to me, that's the really there's creativity itself as an individual, but when you socialize that creativity and put people in an open-minded, exciting environment where they're slightly out of their comfort zone, they're starting to look for things that they didn't already know, but are informed by stuff that they already know. To me, that's just the magic, and that's why we do Creative Melbourne. That's exactly how it's designed.
One of the things too, Arthur, that supports your point about the benefit of having people co-creating, working together to be creative. This is also reflected in James Surowiecki's work, The Wisdom of Crowds. The concept that all of us are smarter than any of us doesn't just stand by itself. There's certain conditions that make that work, because crowds can also be pretty dumb. The conditions required for the crowd to be smart and individual, there are three basic elements. Diverse membership, reflecting exactly what you said, people even from different disciplines. Members being able to think independently, so you're avoiding groupthink, and having an environment where your knowledge can be pooled, where you can bring all of that diversity together and focus it. Those are the critical steps.
I guess it seems like with creativity, it does take a little bit of confidence to be able to do it. I mean, because a lot of times people feel like they've got some really great ideas, but they don't really want to share it because they're scared of what people might think of them, or scared of people might say, oh, what are you talking about, and you don't know, you're wrong, that sort of thing. So have you guys ever come across this sort of thing, and what would you guys do to sort of help people feel a bit more confident?
Give them red wine. That usually helps.
There's some other bits of research I collected a while ago that when you put together make quite a powerful case about innovative or creative conversations. And one of the primary principles in exactly what you're addressing there, Karen, is that if you have a group of people trying to perform a task and one of the people in the group is dominant, as in a senior manager, if it's within an organisation, as soon as they are in the least critical of any idea that's suggested, then everybody will shut up. You're not going to get any creativity at all. So it's all about creating an environment or an open and trusting culture where people can feel free to express ideas and actually learn from experience that they won't be immediately trampled on for doing that. And that is not always an easy environment to create in some organisations.
Yeah. Yeah, which kind of links to the other topic that we'll discuss later around ecosystems and creativity. Because it's not just can't be done in a vacuum. It needs to be, some sort of, I guess, precedent or behavior or something to reference where the people feel safe. I mean, there's a big thing around psychological safety in organizations at the moment that's kind of doing the rounds. And I think that's a big part of that. People have to feel safe to explore their creativity, because it requires a degree of vulnerability as well, which is something that we explored at Creative Melbourne this year. I think it was actually quite a big theme that emerged, is around vulnerability and creativity. Because you have to drop the barriers to express ideas that could be wrong, and you need to, feel that in the environment you're doing it in, that it's safe to do that. You're not going to be ridiculed or shut down or rejected. And it's interesting because then you have this, you kind of have this tension between, particularly within organizations, there's this reductionist thinking of something is right or what's wrong, or if you have a problem, you immediately jump to a solution. So it's quite linear. Whereas creativity is more of a meander sometimes, even if you are using creative thinking techniques to help stimulate the creativity. So it's kind of, you need to balance out this almost this institutional mentality around thinking needs to be linear and it needs to be binary, right or wrong, and allow for that exploration and a bit of sense making that is needed to really let creativity flourish.
And it's so much of this is in the role of the leader. In a creative environment, a leader has to be more of a facilitator than a director. Somebody that can actually create the environment. And there's a quote I saw on this one. As you noticed, I love quotes. This is actually from Conrad Pope, who was the orchestrator and the conductor of the music for the Hobbit movies. He said, "A good conductor is not someone who makes a performance. A good conductor is someone who actually releases a performance from all of the great individuals in his orchestra."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really nice insight. The conversation has stimulated a couple of things that I've read recently. I went back to the 7 Principles of Learning, which was set up by the Institute for Research on Learning. That was actually co-founded by John Seeley Brown back in 1986. And they're interesting, to me, learning is creative because when you're learning, you are taking on things that you didn't know before. And they may actually be things, in the case of co-creation, you learn through co-creation by, creating things that didn't exist before, but are informed by what you knew before. But the principles there, sort of learning is fundamentally social. Knowledge is integrated into the life of communities. Learning is an act of participation. Knowing depends on engagement in practice. They're the first 4. But there's a beautiful quote that you could apply to learning or creativity. It says, while learning is about the process of acquiring knowledge, it actually encompasses a lot more. Successful learning is often socially constructed and can require slight changes in one's identity, which makes the process both challenging and powerful. I would say the same applies to creativity. And to me, these are siblings, right? I don't believe you can learn without being creative. And I don't believe you can be creative without learning. Because if you're creating something new, you're learning. And if you're learning, you're gaining something new. So they're related. The other thing, you mentioned Ken Robinson before. I recently read The Element.
Yes.
And it's a great book, right? And you look at the list of chapters there. Think differently, beyond imagining, in the zone, finding your tribe. What will they think? Do you feel lucky? And they're chapters of the book. And to me, leading or facilitating an environment that applies those principles and the essence of those chapters, you can't help but be creative, right? You know, new ideas will come. But as you say, as long as people feel psychologically safe, and as long as there's a confidence and a mutual respect in the environment, without that, everything shuts down. But with that, everything opens up when you get that open mindset.
Yeah, I'm reading his book at the moment, and I'm loving it. It's incredible. I mean, one of the other things that it reminds me of is this this invitational learning, right? Which in essence is what do we need to consider to create an inviting environment for individuals and for groups? And it talks about being personally inviting with yourself. So what are you doing to enrich your own life? And then how do you model that, and how do you invite that in within a group setting? And this model was developed for schools in the States. And I think it's really relevant for this conversation, in that what we're talking about is how do we create, and like we're kind of drifting into the ecosystems in creativity, but how do we create a space that invites the best out of people to explore and to test and experiment and play. And often, like as you said there, we often have these, I think individually, the people have these, we develop these mindsets that kind of get embedded through childhood and school, which says you are creative or you're not creative, or you're not good at, blending things together, or you are really good at blending things together because you're really good at writing stories. So one of the things around individuals and creativity is how do we help people move through those, those limiting mindsets that they go, no, I can't think creatively because, I'm a very logical, rational thinker. Yeah.
I mean, my own personal journey has been very much like that. I mean, my first 2 degrees was in science, and I was, always rewarded for my logical thinking. And I was doing a major project in Poland in 1999, and I actually said to someone, I'm not at all creative, and he just looked at me and said, well, you're one of the most creative people I know. You're always coming up with an alternative. And, like Brad and Keith said earlier, the mindset is that we don't believe what we are. But when we start to believe that we are, and we have some confidence around that, it's amazing what we can achieve. And the mindset, our own mindset, holds us back. If you believe you're not, then you're not, right? Opening it up makes a huge difference.
Yeah, so I've shared before that one of the guys I've worked with in a couple of different roles over several years came from an engineering background and would frequently say, I haven't got a creative bone in my body. Yet when we went to sales conferences where there'd be some sort of entertainment on in the evenings, he was the first one to be dressed in drag and up on stage playing some character in a role play.
Yeah.
And did some amazingly creative stuff, but couldn't see it.
And I think that's the main thing that we're trying to do with things like Creative Melbourne, that we're trying to get people to realize that, you don't have to go to art school to be creative. You don't have to be a singer or a painter. The fact is that, the way that everyone is taught in business schools and the way that everyone is taught at school, stick to the logic, stick to the IQ, sort of focus on the answer, discover the answer because it's out there. Whereas actually someone with an open creative mindset, Carol's work of, do you have the growth mindset or the static one? This idea of if you just allow yourself to be creative, it's amazing what you can achieve. And the problem is you've got to experience that to develop confidence. People can tell you that all day, but people can tell you how to ride a bike, but until you get on and you fall off a couple of times, you actually then get to enjoy it. Then the bike just becomes a tool. Creativity just becomes a tool in everything that we do. Looking outward, finding different options. Say asking the question. Well, why would you do it that way? Why are we doing this when we could be doing that? That questioning of the status quo, I think, is a really, really good way to express your creativity, just as a normal tool, a normal thing that you do.
In standard 3, I don't know what grade that is now. They're at grade 2, maybe. I started at a new primary school, right? And we were going to music class, and I saw a couple of kids split off to go to a different classroom. So I followed them and went in, and they were learning the recorder. So I was like, oh, this is great. Now I'm going to learn the recorder. I'd never been exposed to learning a musical instrument before then. And at the end of my first year of learning the recorder, the music teacher wrote in my report, Bradley has no ear for music. Full stop.
Yeah.
And since then I was like, oh, damn, I'm not musical at all. Can't sing, can't play instruments. I've grown up with this mindset of, I suck at music. I'm no good at it, right?
Yeah.
And I've always thought, oh, it'd be good to learn to play the guitar, the piano, the trumpet. I'm like, but I'm not really good at music. Until about 2 years ago, I was determined to learn a musical instrument. So I thought I'll start with the ukulele because it's really easy. That was my impression. And so for the last 18 months, I've been enjoying playing the ukulele. So I've learned a couple of chords, had the musician app. And I love it, and it actually helps my thinking. So when I'm doing particularly heavy thinking work for client work, I'll sit and I'll strum and play the ukulele just to take my mind off that the focus on a particular design challenge that I'm facing, and it just helps me to relax. And I'm finding that it's actually helped now being able to play a musical instrument. I'm finding it's helped to keep my thinking a lot more fluid and not as rigid. So it's incredible. And also countering that message that, that mindset of Bradley is not musical at all. And that's where I got this thing of, because I'm not musical, I'm not creative. So therefore, I can't attempt anything creative. So it's interesting how these messages get embedded in our heads when we're quite young. And then we grow up thinking we're not creative at all until we change it. And I think it's been interesting though, because being a part of the knowledge management community and being involved with Creative Melbourne has really opened up my mind in terms of seeing things from so many different perspectives, and particularly the caliber of presenters we have at Creative Melbourne talking about their own experiences with creativity and innovation in the work they're doing and in their own lives has been hugely inspirational, and it's helped me to see things through a different perspective. It's helped me to modify my own thinking and to test that different things as well, which is translated into, personal life in my relationship with my kids and the stuff that I'm talking to them about, and, the areas of interest for me that I want to learn about, as well as with my work. So, once you part of a community where you're allowed to explore your creativity, it's incredible how my mind just seems to flourish. It's like being home, essentially.
So I guess essentially, in order for people to practice being creative, they've really got to just embrace it. Like, they've got to be vulnerable. They've just got to just give it a go and just see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. In a nutshell.
Actually, one other point I'd like to make on that too is that, I've said how, in one example, an engineer didn't believe that he had any creativity, but look at how many of the actual work roles we do, particularly, now where knowledge work is so important, and how much creativity is actually involved in just doing basic elements of much of today's jobs. Interesting, Brad, talking about music. One correlation that's been identified some years ago was that many actual computer coders are also quite gifted musicians. The theory is that there are some elements of the sort of structured way of thinking that you need for music that's actually also required for computer programming. And in fact, when I was first learning computer programming, one of the descriptions about the job, as much as you may look on as being, like a technician, somebody, stuck behind a desk for hours drinking lots of coffee, programming is actually referred to not so much as a science as an artistic application of a science. Just today I've been writing exam questions for a client. Part of that involves inventing a business scenario that you can then use for forming questions. Now, just coming up with a half-page scenario of a feasible or at least convincingly realistic business scenario, that requires creativity.
Yeah, it does.
definitely. I know that you're trying to wrap this one up, Karen. It's been a very interesting and meandering conversation, right? But that's why conversations are so wonderful and creative, right? But I just wanted to quickly stick one thing in at the end. Another great book by Ken Robinson, Sir Ken Robinson, was Creative Schools, and just going back to what Brad was saying before about, you know, sort of the way in which we get heavily influenced by our teachers and we get put into boxes. You know, the last chapter of Creative Schools is changing the climate, and I think this is what we're trying to do at Creative Melbourne. We're trying to get people to see that there is an alternative, there is a different way, and what's more, it's not an alternative way; it's actually a better way. You know, and if businesses had more creativity embedded into the way that they do their decision-making processes, they would have more options, they would have better prioritization, and they'd be more aligned with their stakeholders. So, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that bringing creativity back into business will actually improve its performance. And I think if you look at the top businesses around, they're all creative. You know, the top 10 businesses are all creative businesses. They understand. It's the fit into the box ones that don't.
Yeah,